that uniqueness. And there's no other Punxsutawney. In spite of the movie that tried to put it in West Virginia, it doesn't exist in West Virginia. And we have other things to our credit that we are unique for, and we always take pride in, whether we live in the borough or outside the borough. And those are those long continuous chain coke ovens in the Walston area. At the time that they were done, they were the longest continuous chains, 1.25 miles. We didn't necessarily produce the most coke in the world, but we had that particular thing to our credit. And then, of course, you know, Phil. We all know about him too. But you know, it isn't just the borough, it's outside the borough that matters too. And so, since I attended a one-room school, it made a big impact on my life. And I think about it fondly often, and I think about the interesting things that happen, and I have a lot of memories. Do I remember absolutely everything? No. It so happens I found a picture in my mother's album this summer, earlier in the year, and it was obviously taken down at the house where I used to live, my grandparents' house, I should say. And it must have been a year-end school picnic, because I recognized a bunch of blowses. Okay, I couldn't identify all of them, but some of them. And I thought, was I there? I don't remember this event. It was a fuzzy picture, blurry. So I called my cousin Bob Roderick, and he and I call each other on our birthdays. And my birthday's in May, and his is in October. I'll be calling him again. But I called him and I said, do you remember this? Yeah, yes, I sort of do. I said, can you identify these people? I'll send it to you. It was a bad picture. He just really couldn't. He said, I think I have the same picture taken from a different vantage point with a different camera. I'll look. So he found it. It was good. You could see the people a lot better. He said, that's definitely you in the front row wearing the cowgirl outfit. He said, but I don't know where I am in the picture. But looking at the picture, I spotted him too. And then there was a little boy that was wearing a sport coat. We all know who he was. I mean, who wears a sport coat in first or second grade out in the country? You know, he did. But anyway, he was different. And so, so that got me to thinking, because we had, in the Historical Society, quite a few years ago, a book written by Frank Basel called Memories of the One Room Schoolhouse. And it was a wonderful thing. It was a fundraiser. And at some point in time, we had it reprinted, and we still have some of those available. And mostly he interviewed teachers. Well, there are none of those people left to interview, but there are those of us who did attend the school. And I thought, we need another book. I guess I have to do it. So it's going to be a long project, but I am serious about doing this, and I want to have conversations with everybody that remembers something, either of their own experience, or maybe your parents told you, grandparents, or whatever, because it so happens that my mother told me a lot about her experience in a one-room school, and her father's experience in a one-room school, and she also told me what happened with my father's family. All 4 of my grandparents went to one-room country schools outside the borough and never went to high school, but they had wonderful, successful lives as part of the community, the broader community. And I'm thinking, why is it that we call ourselves Punxsutawneyites when we're away? Well, part of it has to do with the school we all attended, Punxsutawney Area High School. I mean, think about it. There's several people here who graduated with me, 3 at least, and other people before and after. And so when you look at that handout that has Jefferson County and Indiana County, and if you don't have one handy, make sure you get it there. I found these maps, and you can find maps like this that show Jefferson County and Indiana County. And of course, we're down at the bottom of Jefferson County, and that blue section in the middle, bottom of Jefferson, top of Indiana, that blue area, that's the Punxsutawney Area School District. And I went ahead and inked in the names of the townships. There's 9 townships in Jefferson County and 2.5 in Indiana County that are part of our district. Well, that wasn't always true. I mean, when I went to elementary school, our townships had boards of directors who decided where the buildings were going to be, who was going to go to what building, which ones needed to be enlarged or moved or whatever. And so this consolidation had not taken part yet for that. And it more or less happened in 1959. And I have memories of that because the neighbor up the road, who was also my bus driver, Howard Stewart, he was president of the board of directors for the Perry Township. And they had been working on this consolidation thing for some time. And they were going to have a big dinner at the high school in the fall of '59 to recognize all of this. And he didn't get to go because he had a heart attack at some point prior to that. And my father was the one who was tapped to go to that dinner because he was on the board as well. I don't know if he was a VP or whatever, but Daddy and Mama and I all went to that dinner, and I certainly remember that dinner in the high school in 1959. And so from that point forward, we were as one, so to speak. But it was not always the case. If you flip on the other side, you'll see this is a list that was prepared by the school district that listed the various townships that make up the district and the one-room and two-room schools and others that were closed and when that all happened. And if you go to Perry Township over there, let me see if that's the one that I want to look at. No, actually I want to look at, well, anyway, Perry, Porter, Ringgold, Timlin. You'll notice the last closings were in 1960 because that's when Mapleview became available and was ready to be used to combine all these kids. And I remember thinking at the time there were people who didn't like that concept. Their kids were going to have to ride buses too far to school. Prior to that, most of them had been able to walk or just bus the short distance. So there were people who were opposed to that at the time, and I don't know what they think of it now, that even those schools are closed and everybody has to go to town. But we will not talk about that. But anyway, there are 122 schools on this list. Can you imagine? 122 schools. Mostly one room, couple two-room, couple three-room schools. And these are just the ones they know about. There are others. There were some that came before. And in my own case, I'm from Grange number 2, as I said, in Perry Township. It's not even a spot on the map, but there was a post office, a store, Grange Hall, a church, and 2 separate places. So the store and the church and the Grange Hall were in one place, and the other store and the post office were in another place, and the dividing line between Grange number 1 and Grange number 2 is pretty much Mapleview School. It's just wherever you are in relation to Route 536. Not that there's a town there, it's just farms, but there we are. So, so I attended the Schilling School, and we will talk more about that later. In your program, there's a cover shot of a one-room school, and at the Historical Society we have pictures of the majority of our one-room schools, and they're not all real good. I mean, this one looks like I tried to make it artistic, but that's just how faded it was, okay? It just was not really a good picture. And I didn't name it, but I'm naming it on the inside because there's a group of students in 1897 from the Hoch School, H-O-E-H. Now, on your list, it says, and that would be Bell Township, it's spelled H-O-C-H, which is kind of how it sounds when it's spoken, but the people who lived there, their names were H-O-E-H. And if you look at this list of students, that's what their names are. So you'll see a lot of, half a dozen different families with multiple people who attended that school. Interesting to me, because the fellow in the back row on the left, his name is William Armstrong. Well, Don's brother is named Bill, William Armstrong. Well, this is their great-grandfather, William Armstrong, when he was in, I assume, 8th grade, standing in the back row. And I just think that's just a wonderful thing. So that's why I decided to picture the school, because most of the schools kind of look like this. White, rectangular, with a bell on top, a porch in the front. Depending on what terrain it's on, it might be on the hillside, kind of like this one is, with steps to get up into the school, or it might be on a flat place someplace. The school I attended was on the side of a hill, but there was a flat place for the building.
Marty, can I talk about the construction a little bit?
Sure.
I visited every site in Punxsutawney district. Some schools are gone, some have foundations, some exist. But they're all basically built with stone foundations and then these, I can't remember, grooved wood siding. They all kind of look like most of them. And it depends on how much money each area had, on how elaborate it was, but they were basically the same. And the teacher would be in the back side and they'd have windows on the side and the front. Does anyone know what a blackboard is? What is it?
Well, it was a piece of slate across the back of the room.
No, that's not a blackboard.
Okay.
That's a slate board. All these boards that I'm talking about, inside and outside, were grooved. They painted the boards behind the teacher black and wrote on the black board. Later, they come up with slate and replaced it with slate. I like to talk about that because people don't know. And I just want to say, I know I was the only person that went to all 4 Bell Township schools in my first 6 grades. I went to Clo number 1 for 2 years, Clo number 2 for 2 years. We moved to Albion. Went to Albion for 1 year, moved back to, well, that's Township 2, back towards Rossiter. And I went to Fairview. No one else has done. And when they replaced Bell number, the modern Bell up on the airport, they had 4 bells. What's the man's name? That was in charge. Well, one man was responsible to get all the bells from the school and put them in front of this replacement school. And when they sold the building, I wanted the bells, but they disappeared. I don't know where they went. So I just wanted to mention that.
If you have a school bell, you need to guard it because they do have a habit of disappearing.
We have the school bell from Schilling.
Yeah, it's in the basement, in Ann's house. We'll have to figure out what to do with it. So, so what we see here as the white school, it was the more typical way that the old schools looked. And then Tanya was happy enough to bring this painting that Joanne Garrett had done of the school in Oliver, which is a lovely painting. Joanne did so many beautiful paintings of buildings around the area. But my mother did not want me to get that for her because it was never red when she attended. And the only reason it was red was because some itinerant painter came around and volunteered to paint some houses and barns and whatever anybody wanted painted. And at that time, the community center in Allberg had charge of that building, and that's what they did. And it was fine. I mean, you need to paint a building periodically, you know. But she didn't want that in her house, because that's not her memory, okay? I know what her memory was. And there's another building or two that's painted as well, and I wonder if it started out that way, if it started white. And that brings me to the topic of, there's really kind of 2 or 3 buckets of one-room schools in terms of time frame. Because the ones we remember look like this. But there were other ones before that. And what do you suppose they were made out of? Logs. The first houses were log cabins. The first churches were log churches. The first schools were log buildings. And you find that out when you look at the various histories of Jefferson County. Now, for example, there's a map of 1868, and another one 1866, and another one of 1878. And then Kate Scott wrote her history of Jefferson County in 1888, and then McKnight wrote his history in 1897. And in Caldwell's Atlas, which is the 1878 thing, there's a lot of pages that deal with history. Well, when you go to look at the information about the schools, which they provide a lot of information, they start talking about the pioneer person, the pioneer church, the pioneer sawmill, the pioneer grist mill, the pioneer school. Pioneer? Really? I just really didn't think of it in that term. They're just using that as a word that means first. The first school, the first church, the first resident, you know, the first sawmill, and so on and so on. You put that out of your mind and you can read the history. They pretty much all word for word say the same thing with a few variations. So you wonder, did they copy from one another? Because they weren't all done at the same time. Did they collaborate? I understand that McKnight and Scott worked together when she was putting her book together. Or was there another source they were using? And of course, some of their sources were courthouse records and that sort of thing. And they relied on what they know. You know, you don't know what you don't know. So all of that information is wonderful. But when you're seeking some specific thing about some specific area or some specific church or some specific school, you kind of find sometimes it's not in the book. Like I was doing a history of the Ebenezer Church out in Route 536, just past my church, and I couldn't find anything except they said it was Ebenezer, and they were naming some names that sounded maybe, but it was some church up in the northern part of the county. It was another Ebenezer church. The one I was interested in wasn't named, okay? So I had to rely on some other sources to get some of my information. So, that's kind of interesting. So, since I have a long time interest in one-room schools, this has always excited me. I like to go and talk about this. I like to go and talk about our district. In between there is that area that some people wanted to form their own separate county. Did you know that? There was a move for a short period of time that some of the newspaper people were into. Let's have our own county. We'll call it Mahoning County. Isn't it neat here that we have the Mahoning Valley, VFW here? But that didn't come to pass. But that is an interesting point. So I used to think, and I did look this up, I did find it to be accurate, that at the point in time when Punxsutawney consolidated, it was one of the largest school districts in the state of Pennsylvania. Now that is no longer the case because there are a number of county-wide districts now across the state, which make us further down the list as far as territory goes. We haven't gone to that drastic thing, but you know, that occurs. But it was still something to be interested in. So one day at the museum, some material came in from Skeeter Cook. Now he was raised by his uncle, Howard Stewart, and they were all from Grange number 2, and and there was a whole bunch of clippings, and they were all from Grange related, people, places, events going on in the years past. And I think Mrs. Howard Stewart collected these. Margie was a historian too, and she collected all this. Well, among them was this lengthy clipping here. And although it speaks directly only about the Schilling School, it says so much about all of the schools. And I was astounded to learn that before the school that I went to, there were 2 prior Schilling schools, and it replaced. So I have no intention of reading this whole thing, but this article, I believe, was written and published in the Punxsutawney Spirit in about 1835, probably Labor Day of 1935, excuse me, because they have a lineup here of teachers. And the last teacher with a date is 1932, 1935, and then the last fellow doesn't have any dates beside his name yet because the school year hadn't quite started yet, Theodore Gahagan. But, so I'm thinking that this newspaper article was published in 1935. So it says here that the one that I'm familiar with, the one that's on our family's property, was built in 1871. And there were several hundred people attended this reunion. And some things to point out. The person in charge of the meeting was Vern Means. Okay, that family lived in the Schilling farmhouse, which is the farmhouse right on the far side of the Porter Road, before you keep going west. An Amish family lives in that property now. So Vern, and by the way, his daughter was one of the teachers in the list of teachers. So that's the first interesting thing. They had a nice day, and they took some pictures, and then there's some more talk, and talking about the rural schools playing an important part in rural life. And so Maud Means, Vern Means' daughter, was tasked with writing the history of the Schilling School. And you get down about the second half of the paper here, and she says, the first Schilling School was built on the old Schilling farm. Duh, that's why it's called Schilling. The structure was built of logs, that's what you would expect, was directly north of the Grange post office. We actually had a Grange post office operated. The furnishings were meager but quite typical. The seats were made of slabs. Now, in other writings, I've seen that described as puncheons, Puncheons. I looked it up on Google. You pronounce it puncheons. It's a big long log. They split it in half lengthwise. They put the flat side up and the round side down and create a floor. And they also made benches out of them with legs. So the early ones were not like we remember with the rows of desks. They were long benches. Later, a frame building was erected. So Grange, the second Schilling School was a frame building. Okay, fine, moving forward. On the grove of the S.L. Stewart farm, which was right around in the same general area, but not exactly sure where. I think across the road from the first one. It served until 1871, when the school was divided into 2 buildings because of population growth. Okay, what to do? So different towns, different communities chose different ways to enlarge their school. Sometimes they put on a second story, like in Cool Spring. Like in Sprinkle Mills, second story. 4 grades below, 4 grades above. Sometimes they put on an addition, 4 grades on one side, 4 grades on another side, 2 teachers. Like Frostburg, like Hamilton, like many other schools. Sometimes they just built a second building right beside the first building, like the twin schools up by Oneida, right? And they did that in Timlin too, apparently. So it was up to the individual school board to decide how they were going to do it. So this particular one, they needed 2 buildings, and they decided to create 2 schools in 2 locations, Schilling number 3 and Moser. So there's farm people out there that live out the Porter Road by the last name of Moser, so it was probably on their land. It's usually how the name arrived. The building, erected in 1871, was built by Michael Schilling, that's my great-grandfather, on the Jacob Schilling farm. He was assisted by Henry Moser. Okay, probably the same 2 men built the other school too, I should think. He was assisted by Henry Moser and his daughter, Mrs. Martha Ann Anthony. Okay, you know, my name on the program says Martha Ann Stoops Armstrong. I don't really call myself Martha Ann all the time, but I sign checks that way. But in spite of the fact that my mother's name was Martha, I was not named for my mother. I had 4 great-grandmothers whose names were Martha, or Ann, or both. And there was a couple of Esthers in the group there too. I was named after all of those women, okay? So it sounds like this lady by the name of Martha Ann Anthony helped carry the shingles up, but no. This is at the present time when this was written, she was this lady. But when she carried the shingles up the ladder, she was 7 years old. I looked it up when she was born, 1864, okay? 1871, she's 7 years old. So she's carrying shingles up the ladder for her father. The seats were benches with broad boards for desks. Okay, they're still having multiple person benches, you know, not individual desks. Each seat accommodated from 3 to 4 pupils. Mr. Schilling obtained the contract for the building from yada yada. The original, he was paid a horse for his services. He got a horse for building that building. I'm sure the lumber came right off the property. I mean, it's all woods. The original blackboard was surfaced lumber, painted black. Documentation of what we had been presuming was maybe typical. It's not a one-time thing. This is what they did. And we already suspected it because Don had been in the Moser School, which is falling down to nothing now, but 10 years ago, he got in there and took pictures of the painted black wood boards with chalk writing on it. I got in the Oliver Schoolhouse, it's pretty bad now too, and I took pictures of the painted black wood boards. And there's a school district down, or not a district, a school converted to a garage down in the Ringgold area, and the owner took me in there, and it has painted black wood boards. So, you know, I think that was a thing. They had to have done that everywhere. That was a thing. Because slate would be expensive, they had to haul it mostly from the eastern part of the state. There's a place called Slate Valley, where most of our slate came from, I think. Okay, later replaced by the slate blackboard now in use. And the fact that there was a blackboard at all was a modern invention. The early schools, you didn't face the front of the room. You faced the wall. The log building, no windows except spaces between logs, covered over with greased paper. Okay, I'm thinking bear grease or lard, something. You know, when you put grease on a piece of paper, it makes it kind of translucent. If you've ever done that, we did that with the kids last year. Hold it up to the light, you can see through, it lets light through. So the original blackboard was surface lumber painted black, later replaced by the slate blackboard now in use. So the original ones were desks along the wall, boards also. And then it names a lot of the officers of the school board. You can look at that at your leisure. Due to the growing population, the building became inadequate already. It needed to be enlarged. An addition was put on the rear sometime between 1914 and 1916. Well, now we can see that because we still have the foundation. And the original school building is on stones, made of stone, but the back end of the school is on a poured cement foundation. You can see the difference. They just added enough, put in, I don't know, about 10 feet, 20, 15 feet maybe, put in another set of windows and enlarged the building. And they maintained the shape of the roof, the shape of the building, they just stretched it out a little bit. So now we know when that happened, in 1871. And it goes on to teachers' monthly salaries in 1879 ranged from $22 to $27, I think it's there, per month. So the growing population was 1914, 1916, and that was done. And then in the winter of 1933-34, they got a federal grant for the, I forget what that C stands for, maybe Citizens? I'm not sure. Works Association, sponsored by C.M. Stoops, that was my grandfather, to improve the school grounds and road past the building. Now I want to talk about Grandpa. He was born out in the Canoe Ridge area. His birthday being when it was, well, he was 14 when he finished 8th grade, because that's, okay, no high schools yet at that time. He went to the Cabot Academy, and there was a church in Cavo that had a school element about itself, and they had a academy, and young people studied there for 2 years, and when they were done, they were able to get certified to teach in the one-room schools. So he was back teaching at age 16 in Rossiter. That's what my grandfather did. Big boys, he was not a big man. He never had a problem, I guess. I understand. He went on from there. He got a job as a trolley operator in Punxsutawney when that was a big thing going on here in Punxsy. He had a bakery in town. He moved to town while his father died because his foot was stepped on by a horse and he got gangrene. So Grandpa had charge of his mother, and he had a wife, and they lived in town here. And then he managed to get a job with the post office, and then he retired as the postmaster at West End. So going to a one-room school and not going to high school did not hold him back, shall we say. And he jumped into whatever community he was in. He was from Canoe Ridge. He made a life for himself in Punxsutawney. When his second wife's father died, they moved out to Grange number 2 to live with mother, okay? And then Grandpa jumped into the church, he jumped into the school, he jumped into everything he could jump into and put his hand on it. And in this case, I see that he knew how to get hold of a federal grant. And that particular winter it was a 5-month period when that happened. If they improved the road, I'd like to know what it looked like before, because it's not much of a road right now either. It's an awful place in the wintertime. Okay, so that's kind of entertaining. So there's a whole list of teachers, and I'd like to point out some of those names, and you might recognize some of those names. For example, you go down a little ways and you see Daniel Wren. The Wren family lived out in Perry Township, and Oliver Township, I do believe, as well, thereabouts. Various names. Keep on going, and you get down to Luther Bush, down about this far. Well, that name sticks out to me because he's the husband of my grandmother's sister, Hulda. Looky there, she's one of the teachers too, Hulda Anthony. That means that he was a teacher when she was a student at Schilling School, and that happened a lot. I didn't know that he was a teacher, but a lot of fellows started out that way and then moved on to other things. A couple other interesting names. Come along down here and you see Maud Maines. I told you she's the one that wrote this history. Her father's on the school board. Next one in the row there's my mother's sister, Imogene Jordan from Oliver. I didn't know that. I didn't know that she was there. Well, there she was before she was married. Emma Plyler was married to Walter Zimmerman from in town here, the surveyor, and they were on that list. So that's all very entertaining. And then when you get down to the end, you see some people who sent their regrets by telegram and said, sorry, can't be here, but it was a wonderful place. It gave me a good start. And so speaking of a good start, I told you about Grandpa Stoops, born in 1876, had these various improvements to his career and, finished at a ripe old age and did well. Okay, he married my grandmother, Maud Stoops. His first wife had died. He had 2 small children. Didn't take him long to find a second wife. Okay, and her people were from Grange number 2. And so in the course of events, that's where they moved. But when she was a kid, they never spoke English in their home. She was the oldest of 10. They spoke Pennsylvania Dutch. She didn't speak English until she went to school at the Schilling School. That makes me wonder, once she started to school, did they start speaking English at home? Because there's all these extra siblings coming along, after her. I suppose they must have. Anyway, she went 8 grades, no question of high school. She went to apprentice as a seamstress. I don't know where, but I know that she ended up sewing for Mrs. Dubois in Dubois at some point or other. And then she was living in town at some point or other with another friend who was a seamstress as well. And she and my grandpa happened to make connections, and that's how they got married. After she was married, she had her own family. But, in spite of not having gone on to school, she didn't go to Cavote Academy. She spoke perfect English. She wrote very well. She researched genealogy ruthlessly. I mean, she was really into that. When they lived in town, they had a bakery, the Stoops Bakery, a deli type place, down where the Civic Center is now. And she joined every club she could think of joining. She belonged to Business and Professional Women's Club. And so she had a fine life too. And they both encouraged their children to go on to school and be part of their community. Now, what about my mother? I told you she went to Oliver. Okay, fine. She was born in 1914, and people of her generation living out in the country seldom had the opportunity to go to high school. And her father certainly did not. He was born in Oliver as well. He, because his birthday's in October, he graduated from 8th grade when he was 13. He just stayed going to school. You ever watch Anne of Green Gables? You know how Anne spent extra years after the regular learning? Well, that's what he did. And when he was 17, he decided he was going to go to Indiana Normal School. He had to take a test. He had to drive over there in a horse and buggy. The wheel broke. He had to fix it before he could move on and get to the test. He was pretty worked up about that because, you know, the test. But when he came home, he told everybody it wasn't bad. It was just the same stuff we were studying at the Oliver School last week. You know? So he had that, and he was teaching by the age of 18 as well, 17 I should say. And he taught up at Battle Hollow, which is up the back road to Oneida. He taught over in Frostburg, where they had some big boys that liked to play jokes on the teacher. He walked to school with a ball bat. He never had any trouble. Okay, so he taught there, but then he was a farmer. He liked to farm, but he was elected to the school board too. Not surprising. He was a teacher. 536, and he went down the Walston Road. So she would either walk down, or her father would take her down to the intersection, and she would get on that little bus full of minors, and she had a little jump seat she sat in, a couple other students. They get to town, and the townies would call them corn-fed huskies, just because they were country kids. They certainly weren't, you know, my mother was very tiny, so it had nothing to do with her size. But nevertheless, she finished high school. She had aspirations to be a nurse, but in the depths of the Depression, that just didn't happen for her. But Aunt Jean did go on to teach, and they all also encouraged their children to achieve additional education as well. So, you know, that's my story, but it is so typical of the experiences of so many others. And that is why I'm asking all of you who have any sort of memories of your own or of family members or whatever, please give me a call and let me know that I can interview with you at some point. Look for your pictures if you have some. I understand there's a picture or two here we can look at. Who has the picture? Who brought a picture? Yeah, Ann brought a picture. That from what school is yours from, Ann?
It's from Oneida, that's where I went. And that's where Roz is in the picture.
Oh, good.
And there's a list of names, but we were sort of playing with it, so, yeah.
You might improve on it.
Pass it around?
Sure.
And somebody
And then,
else had a.
what do you have, Barb?
Clue number 1.
Clue number 1?
When I was in 2nd grade.
What year would that have been roughly?
57.
57? Okay, that's good. And so we have a number of nice pictures. I know that this book, when it eventually gets out here, is going to have at least 122 pages because there's 122 schools on the list. But one way or another, they're all going to be mentioned somehow, plus extra. So figuring out the format is going to be very entertaining. I would recommend, if anybody happens to own an original Punxsutawney Centennial book, which is kind of a leatherette type cover, don't ever trash this. This is a prize. If you find you don't need it, we accept it as a donation. We had it reprinted a few years ago, and we have some to sell. There's a wealth of information about the town in particular. Really good stuff. Caldwell's Atlas has a map of each township. And every time they reprint it, it's smaller and harder to read the fine print. But if you go online and Google Caldwell's Atlas in Jefferson County, they have all those maps available that you can just click on and look at it on your computer screen in a nice big size, and you will see property owner names and schoolhouse and church buildings marked. Pretty hard to line them up with the current roads because the roads have changed somewhat. They're not precisely the same. That's why I'm having trouble identifying where the first two Schilling schools were. But I'll figure it out. So if you're interested in that, to look at those things, you can. And the final thing, keep holding on to it. We're here pretty soon. I was up in the attic the other day, about 3 weeks ago, shutting the window that I open every year for ventilation. I'm seeing this shoebox. It's my mother's. It's too small a size for me, so it's my mother's. I've looked at this box. I'm sure I've looked in it before, but apparently I only looked at what was on top, maybe removed a couple things. So I looked at it again, and I found much more than I expected. I found some of my mother's certificates for perfect attendance at her one-room school. One of them signed by Genevieve Clark, that teacher. I found her graduation certificate from 8th grade. So that was interesting. And then something that she had a few things that were mine that she had saved. And I was sick all the time when I was in grade school. I had to have my tonsils out. And here was a good get well card that all the kids at the school signed. My mother saved that. You can see how some people wrote big and others did not. But I was pleased to find that. And the prize in this box was this little black notebook. In the summer of 1959, you know the consolidation period? My mother and I traveled around to every household that had children that would have gone to the Schilling School or the Moser School. And her task was to write down all their names, their father's name, their birth dates, what grade they were going into the next year. This was not a federal census or anything like that. It was a township census of school kids. And she had little calculations, like she listed everybody, but then apparently she had a final list she turned in elsewhere, that if you were already going to be out of school by such and such a date, don't count those people. And if you're not old enough to go to school yet by such and such a date, don't count those people. But anyway, she and I had such a lot of fun with this. And over the years, we would get it out and we would look at people's birthdays. It was fun. And I thought this book had disappeared. And there it was in that box. And now I know why she was doing it. It was because Daddy was on the school board and they were doing some sort of a census with regard to the teachers, or the students in that time frame of consolidation. That's what was going on. And that's what this book is. So I'm very pleased to have found this.
Marty, what years were that?
When she and I did the trip, 1959, I would say the summer of, when I had just finished 6th grade. Now, my school closed when I finished 4 grades, and Bob and I had to ride, and others had to ride a school bus down to Hamilton. The older kids went to Valier, the younger kids went to Hamilton. So I spent 4 years at Schilling and then 2 years at Hamilton, which was a 2-room school. And each school had their own, like Schilling's had a library, a little shelf with about 20 books on it. When Schilling closed, we were all each allowed to pick a book and take it home. I took Charles Dickens' History of England, as far as, you know how far back he lived, so of course it's not into the present time. I read that book under the covers at night with a flashlight every year and many times over since then. Wonderful book. So I love my Schilling School experience, and I hope to share that with everybody. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add? Yes, Shirley.
Just one point. all of these schools listed on here did not operate every year.
Correct.
What they would do in the township would be take a census and determine where the greatest number of children were, and that would be the school that they opened. And the others would have to go an extra distance to get to that school. But usually, it was, you know, they would, as families grew, the school changed. The school that would be open that year would change. And the reason for, I don't want to say it, creating a workforce or denying people a high school education was that test that you took for township children or youngsters going to high school. They had to pass that test, because if they didn't pass the test, they went into the labor market. And those that passed the test, the township paid for their education. Because the township was responsible for educating the kids.
And even in my time, we had to learn handwriting and, you know, all that kind of stuff. We had to take a handwriting test at the end of 6th grade, and if we didn't pass that, we didn't, my understanding. We had to pass that particular test, among others. No. We're talking about pen and ink and all that other sort of stuff. Okay, anybody else have another comment?
One other story, my dad went to a one-room school. My dad was orphaned and sent to live with his aunt in Winslow Township. And he got through the 8th grade, but his teacher knew or could sense that he needed more education and he wasn't going to get to high school. So the teacher said, "You come back next year, Teddy, and you complete another year, and I will buy you a gun." So my dad went back, repeated the 8th grade again, and got a .22 rifle.
That's interesting. You know, I was talking with Marley Schaefer from Oliver. Her husband Paul passed away. He was from Oliver, out the back right up towards Oneida, and he actually went to school up that direction to the name escapes me, the name of the school, Cortez. Cortez? Up there? Okay. He went up there, and the year he went to 1st grade, he would have been the only one in 1st grade. So the teacher said, "Okay, you're starting in 2nd." And by the way, that's how they managed. They taught the 1st and the 2nd graders together kind of as a group, and the 3rd and the 4th together kind of as a group, and the 5th and 6th. And especially geography and history, stuff like that. You have American history one year and world history the other, so you got it one year or the other.
I had an aunt who was just a couple of years older than I. She started school early because the teacher only had one child in the 1st grade, so she started 1st grade at 4.
Yeah, happens. Okay, well, thank